All down. All silent. Going. Gone. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Current Market Insights. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Brien, and with me is Mr. Peter O'Malley. Peter.
Ciaran, great to see you.
Great to see you, Peter. Juicy topic today, my friend. We have covered underquoting in the past as a broad concept, but more recently we've spoken about a high-profile agent in Sydney who's been charged and ultimately banned, at least for 10 years from the industry, Josh Tesolin. Not here to talk about his behaviour necessarily today, but across social media, across popular media, podcasts, you name it, there is something of a feeding frenzy going on at the moment between high-profile agents, high-profile spokesmen in the industry, all seemingly looking for a war against each other. So I thought it'd be really insightful today for our consumers to firstly cover off what is being said across the industry and who's feeding into who here and who's after who. And then from there we can try and work out what consumers are meant to do to try and actually, operate within the space if they need to utilise an agent for some of their business.
Thanks, Ciaran. Look, the industry's certainly bloodletting over this issue. There's no doubt about that. And I must say, I'm not on Instagram. Well, I'm on Instagram, but I never look at it.
Yeah.
So I have a profile there with 12 people following me. I think that's how popular I am on Instagram.
Like the apostles.
Yeah, that's it. But friends started drawing my attention to high-profile players in the residential real estate industry in Sydney, absolutely shredding each other on social media over Josh Tesolin and Josh Tesolin's ban. And primarily it comes down to this, that the persons involved are either distancing themselves from the practice of underquoting and the incentive fees, and certainly distancing themselves from the individual Josh Tesolin himself. In fairness, there are a couple of people that continue to equally back Josh Tesolin to the hilt and think that he will potentially get off on his appeal to his 10-year ban, or that in spite of his 10-year ban that he didn't deserve it, and it was acceptable practice all along. I don't know, but it's been a bit strange and certainly very interesting to watch what I thought were players in the industry that had good working relationships with each other, absolutely, as I say, tearing into each other on this point.
So there's a couple of questions I kind of want to ask you on this topic, but the first one would be, of the people that are, I guess, have the knives out looking for some kind of fight, those looking to distance in this space, are those people distancing themselves from the agent court, do you think, or are they distancing themselves publicly from the practice of underquoting?
Certainly both.
Yeah.
Certainly both. And, John McGrath did a 40-minute podcast talking about the issue and certainly rebuked Josh Tesolin and his behaviour very strongly. I'll say one thing about John McGrath is that he's not the sort of person that criticises people publicly.
Yeah.
I don't know the man, but I've always found him fair, balanced and reasonable in his public statements. And that's what was so intriguing for me, that he took a bit of a stick to Josh Tesolin on this issue, but equally said, I like the individual and he's made a mistake and he needs to own it. So I didn't tell you this off air, but Josh Tesolin is doing things like taking photos of a Mickey Mouse watch and his $200,000 Rolex and saying, that's my Rolex here and that's the Department of Fair Trade's watch there, and who are they to tell me how to run my life and career? And John is basically saying that's we are in a cost of living crisis at the moment. We are an industry that is not highly respected by the consumer. You have fallen foul of the regulations and been struck off, and that's your response. That is childish, petulant, and a ridiculous response that drags all real estate agents down. So I think that was that was fair commentary from John McGrath in that regard. another high-profile, not real estate agent now, but certainly the co-founder of Bresic Whitney, Ivan Bresic, just out of nowhere has, started putting posts up on Instagram, essentially, saying that Tom Panos, the high-profile real estate trainer, is highly complicit in Josh Tesolin's behaviour. Now, that's a massive accusation.
Yeah.
Massive. And again, I don't believe that Tom Panos is complicit in Josh Tesolin's behaviour. The only one that's complicit in Josh Tesolin's behaviour is Josh Tesolin.
And his team, potentially.
Well, his team are the one that put him in, Ciaran.
No, of course. But I mean, I must admit, I'm not, suggesting anyone else has done anything wrong. But I find it hard to believe that people working close to people don't necessarily, have some insight to behaviours. But, there's always a power imbalance that can make it challenging to, to step up against an authority figure. I mentioned to you off air, interestingly, I often follow real estate conversations on social media, particularly places like Reddit, where it's a weird hive of intellect and oddity, I find. But often, in the Australian conversations, real estate stuff just gets shut down quite quickly and closed off. People are, as you say, consumers don't have a lot of faith in the industry. They're not big fans of the people that conduct business in the industry as a general rule. So the discourse is usually quite short, sharp and negative. But this is one topic, particularly after the 10-year ban was announced, that conversation was long, it was heated, and it was all incredibly anti-Tesolin's behaviour, which I find really interesting because we have said in the past that, underquoting seems so widespread that to me, it seemed laughable that people might be not necessarily opposed, but just that there was so much sentiment against it. But I think this has highlighted there really is a big rift in the industry, and particularly how agents view each other and their conduct. And we've created a real battleground for the way forward.
Well, look, I think there's a couple of points out of what you've just said there. First of all, I think the thing that has really the consumer knows that 90%, if not 95% of the real estate industry in, let's say, Sydney metropolitan are underquoting.
Yeah.
It's rife because the reality is when one firm starts doing it, it forces the others to follow suit. Otherwise, their listings look overpriced. Where I think Josh Tesolin lost any sympathy from the industry or the consumer or the neutral observer is when he started introducing incentive fees, kickers, as the real estate agents call them.
Yep.
And he was telling people that there was no interest in, stands accused and subsequently convicted, stood accused of telling people there was no interest in their house, but if you pay me an extra incentive, I'll divert all of my agents off the other listings and put them on yours, and I'll do my very, very best to get the right result for you on the weekend.
Yeah.
If only you can pay me a supercharged commission. And then the vendor found out after the auction, after they were now obligated to a jumbo-sized commission, that when the agent, Josh Tesolin, came around to see them, that there wasn't, in fact, a lack of buyer interest in the home. There was excess interest, and he just used the fact that there was a lack of interest as a way of convincing them to pay him an extraordinarily high commission.
Yeah.
That's crossing red lines.
Of course.
That makes me furious, even recounting that story, that you would go and sit at someone's dining room table, good working class folk, and convince them of that story. And there's people in the industry that have been in it for a long time, and the real estate industry in Sydney has been good to a lot of people for a long time that sell it, Ciaran. There's some real estate agents in Sydney that are seriously independently wealthy from selling houses.
Yeah, of course.
We're not going to a hospital like you are every day and saving lives and, working on people's health. We're just selling houses and it's been good to a lot of people. So they're furious at what Josh Tesolin did to the people that pay us, the consumer.
Yeah. It's always the case, though. Regardless of topic, industry, whatever, it is always a few bad eggs that do something horrific that completely undermine faith and trust in the system. And as you say, there are good. And, for our listeners, I have the same respect for Peter's honourable like method of business.
Yeah.
There are people like you that suffer in the eyes of the public as a result of behaviours of people like this.
Yeah, well, I don't want this conversation to be about me by any stretch.
You are the good agents is what I'm saying.
So I think the reality was that Tom Panos did training with Josh Tesolin.
Yep.
And this is all in Tom's own admission. He emceed his wedding.
Yep.
And he conducted a course in conjunction, or as a part of it, I wasn't there, naturally, with Josh Tesolin. So Ivan Bresik's coming out and saying, mate, when this was all going on, you were riding as co-pilot.
Yeah.
Now, from what I can gather from the outside, Tom Panos has got a phenomenal workload. I'm not saying he is or he isn't complicit with Josh Tesolin's behaviour. I wouldn't know. I don't think he is, because he doesn't strike me as the sort of person that would condone a smooth-talking salesperson sitting down and manipulating and lying to extract a 3x commission from a working-class person. I just don't believe personally that is who Tom Panos would be, or anyone in this debate for that matter. I think the person that's responsible and complicit in Josh Tesolin's behaviour is Josh Tesolin. Yeah,
and look, there's some argument that the punishment he's received is not sufficient for the crimes that, or the behaviours that he's conducted himself through. Some saying, and as you say, he's out there mocking with the Mickey Mouse watch and the Rolex, and some are saying, there's been reports of $10 million in commissions, and I think it was $33,000 in fines here, which still tells me that there is a long way to go in terms of the industry punishing those that are doing the wrong thing.
Well, he's showing no signs of remorse.
No,
zero.
No.
To the degree, for the people that are listening to this and have loosely followed this story, his source, maybe not his main source, but a source of income that Josh Tesolin is doing at the moment is running real estate seminars for real estate agents, teaching them how to be a success. So he didn't even wait.
No,
he didn't even wait a period of time for this to die down and then come back and say I'm remorseful, but I did, before I went bad I was doing it really well, and this is what I did do, and come back that way. He's gone from selling real estate to band to doing seminars straight away, and that is a slap in the face for the consumers that were that were fleeced and ripped off or victims of his way. And the other thing I think that, and I'm only thinking about this now as we talk, I think the reason that the real estate industry, Ciaran, is so agitated by what Josh Tesolin has done, other than he's given everyone a bad name, it's the regulation and the oversight that he's invited on the real estate industry, because everything that the Department of Fair Trade and the state government are doing in the name of tighter oversight on the on the real estate industry, Josh Tesolin's name is brought up. So he's now got this association where if it wasn't for Josh Tesolin, you wouldn't be back in the office at 9 o'clock at night tidying up files and compliance and keeping yourself across that side of thing. But it's because this guy has gone completely rogue and exposed the gaps in the system that the rest of the industry are now paying a price. And I think that's a part of why the industry is bloodletting to the degree that it is. In the podcast that I referred to, John McGrath suggests this could be the lowest point for the real estate industry in Australia. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'll tell you this, though. There's no surprise we're here.
No. We have been talking about this for the last couple of years. You have been talking about it as long as I've known you.
Yeah.
It's an open secret. Yeah. Everyone knows this is happening.
And I think that's where Ivan Bresik, and he's I'm not I don't know the guy either, and I'm not saying that he's wrong or right to do what he's saying. Let's call a spade a spade. The first conviction for underquoting was against Bresik Whitney.
Yeah.
The first charge, and that was dismissed on a technicality, not on the fact that there was no evidence of underquoting. It was dismissed on a technicality because the real estate agent working for Bresik Whitney was doing it as a contractor. And when the New South Wales government lost that case, they changed the legislation saying that even if a contractor is working under XYZ Real Estate, the licensee of XYZ Real Estate is responsible for that contractor, where that wasn't the case back in 2015 when that took off. So Josh Tesolin is not the only real estate agent that underquotes. What's remarkable, if you can believe this, is, as we know, Josh Tesolin was wiped from the industry, and a mere 6 months later, another agent down the road that took Josh Tesolin's market share, guess what he got banned for?
You can only imagine.
Yeah, underquoting.
Of course, yeah.
Same thing.
You know, I have to wonder, like, I have a few things about this whole topic that really bug me. The first is that in almost any other industry, if you were banned for misconduct, and you mentioned the hospital earlier, let's use medicine or health as an example. If you have your license revoked for misconduct, dangerous behaviours, whatever it might be, you don't just get to go down the road and become an educator in the space, because there's an expectation that the industry is protected from your style of behaviours. And I find it absolutely perplexing that fair trading are allowing the training business to happen, because I don't think
they've got any jurisdiction. That's the problem.
No, but I can't help but think there has to be tighter legislation around the industry collectively.
Medicine's regulated and tightly controlled, where, if you want to go and hire a hall, put your name on and say, I'll teach you some secrets, and people want to turn up and pay $1,500 a head for the day. It's a free market.
No, look, I agree. I understand the reason that there's not tighter regulation here, but I think there needs to be if they're gonna put out these kinds of bans for these behaviours, because there are, this is probably a little bit cynical, but there are young, fresh agents out there who have watched people like Josh on social media, seen his lifestyle, they see his Rolex, they see this wealth, and they think, I don't care what it takes. You've only got to look, slight divergence, but look at Louis Theroux's latest Manosphere videos. There is a whole subculture of people that are profit first. And with profit first comes terrible, manipulative and dangerous behaviours. And in this case, people lost some money, but it could be a lot worse, right? Some people could be, that's one whole gripe I have with this whole thing.
I think your gripe is completely justified. We said this earlier in the year. Consumers who are listening to this, they need to remember this about real estate agents. When the Wolf of Wall Street...
Yeah, I was going to raise Jordan earlier. No, I'm glad you brought him up.
When the Wolf of Wall Street was speaking at a real estate conference on the Gold Coast, tickets sold out in record time from young real estate agents, probably old ones too, rushing up to the Gold Coast to hear the Wolf of Wall Street tell his secrets or whatever he told.
Yeah.
That's the real estate industry. So if you're out there and saying, well, what's a rogue bloke out at Quakers Hill got to do with me? Well, okay, he was probably at the pointy end of everything we're discussing here, and at the sharpest end of the extreme end of what was going on. But do not mistake this as he's a rogue agent, and there might be 2 or 3 more that need to be weeded out. This is deep, and that's why I say when John McGrath says this is the lowest point in the cycle for the Australian real estate industry, I'm not so sure about that.
No, well, this is the tip of the iceberg potentially, and
Correct.
The pointiest part gets caught because it's above the waterline. I guess that to really move the podcast into the second phase, with all of this going on, knowing that there is very likely a whole subculture or underbelly of young, whatever it might be, energetic, less than honourable or ideal agents potentially coming up through with profit first and foremost, knowing that agents like Tesolin are out there spruiking whatever might be part of their training course, knowing that the agents, some senior agents in the industry are actively attacking and fighting across the open trenches at the moment. If you're a consumer, which is who, consumers are our audience on this podcast, and we're trying to educate people here about what's happening. If you are a consumer, what on earth are you meant to do? And how are you meant to navigate all this if you actually need to utilize the industry? Because from the outside, it looks like a completely disheveled, frat party where no one is really in control. And it's just chaos.
Yeah, look, when it comes to selling a property, I've seen many examples where an agent will confide in myself or other members of our team. I don't like, when they're a buyer, I don't like such and such because they underquote. I don't like such and such because they lie.
Yeah.
I don't lie such and such because we thought we had it, and then they sold it to someone else for a higher price. When that buyer goes on to buy, who do they give their listing to?
Oh, well, they always sell with the one who
Such and such.
exactly the same person.
They go
I know.
straight back to the
We've had
person.
this happen
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah. So there's an element there where the consumer needs to acknowledge that the fees being paid to real estate agents are substantial.
Yeah.
And if someone will lie, for you, they'll lie to you, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So you need to you need to find someone that conduct the sale of your property and won't do it in such a cavalier fashion. And it's a good time to be touching on this point, Ciaran, because when it comes to underquoting, a lot of vendors are complicit on it.
Yeah.
Because it creates a bidding frenzy, and then the highest bidder will end up going at or above what the vendor wants, and the vendor's happy, and it's the agent's job to mop up and make good with all the underbidders, and the vendor sails off into the wind. The environment we're in at the moment, where auction clearance rates are hovering between 33 and 37%, let me tell you what happens if you underquote. One buyer turns up, puts in one low, lousy bid, and then your campaign is up in smoke.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had real estate agents who I've seen down the coffee shop in the last few weeks say, mate, I'm just putting the price on the property what the vendor wants.
Yeah.
And someone buys it or they don't. But there is no way that I'm doing an underquote with the regulator floating around the market like they are, and there's no buyers, and then running an auction and it starts, at 2.3 when the vendor wants 2.65, and you've got to pass the property in for 2.32. I don't want to be anywhere near that.
Yeah.
And that's the right way for the real estate industry to play it, is that these are not the market conditions and they are not the tactics that are going to hold going forward.
Look, as someone who's no longer actively in the industry, I can only hope that, the Josh Tesolin case, I only read in the paper yesterday, I can't remember the name, but another agent received a ban just for misconduct in his behaviours. I can't remember specifics, but it's, we've entered a phase where at least whether it's, sufficient or not, the regulators are doing something. But it will be really interesting, I think, over the next, weeks to months to see what the industry says to each other and what the industry says about the industry. And if there is any positive change in terms of training behaviours, where even the structure of agencies, whether the powers hold as we move through this period. Because there's a lot of, whilst there's no licensees other than Tesolin that went down in this case, there are a lot of brand names that float around as being implicated to some degree because of their involvement. And, I think for the first time probably ever, the public are actually really watching these behaviours. The public hate on real estate agents, as we've talked about, but now they have a target and they have some kind of structure to really be angry about.
Oh, that's right. Well, I think all the Herald articles, The Age in Melbourne, for those that are listening in Melbourne, the Age and the Herald series on this blind bidding, they called it.
Yep.
It's educated the consumer.
Yeah.
So the questions that I get from my own vendors now, it's like, this person's schooled up.
Yeah.
This person wants to know where my philosophy is relative to what the current guidelines are, and filling gaps in their thinking because they're across it, but not as entirely as an industry participant would be. So the consumer is far more informed on this, and that's part of
which is great.
It is great, and that's part of the method of the Department of Fair Trade working in lockstep with the the Herald journalists there on this issue. So look, we're very close in New South Wales to real estate agents having to put a price guide on every property and a published advertised price guide. It can still go up from there, as I understand it. There's no rules against that, but agents will be creating a digital footprint for themselves in their campaigns. And as we've seen in Balmain in recent times, properties with a guide of 2.5, 2.6, the vendor wants 3.1, and it passes in for auction at 10% above the agent's price guide. Those examples are going to be investigated from now on.
aside from the fact that it's a chaotic time for consumers, I really feel like we're making positive steps in the industry, and there is really only onward and upward from here. But that's not to say we won't be discussing Josh Tesolin and the events that follow his case more closely as we move forward. But hopefully our listeners have found something interesting in this topic today. It's certainly an important one for the industry, but it's I guess in many ways very interesting to see the industry eating itself a little bit for the first time, at least in my memory. But as always, Peter, I really thank you for coming in and talking with us about it.
Yeah, thanks, Ciaran. Look, I can truly say in my 29 years this year in real estate, I've never seen the industry tearing itself apart like it is at the moment over this issue and this individual. It's been interesting to say the least.
Yeah, well, it certainly is. And it's, as I say, we'll be following it closely as we move forward. Look, I thank you for coming in, Peter, and I thank everyone for listening to Current Market Insights. We look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate, the podcast providing real estate insights you won't find anywhere else.